Yo, what's going on? I, Archbishop Beaumont from the illustrious Noble House of Beaumont, coming to you, my people, from the Third Temple English Church of England, also known as a Royal Peculiar. For those who do not know what a Royal Peculiar is, a Royal Peculiar is a church or a temple church that is outside of the province that it sits in and outside the diocese and property of the so-called crown, which means it's only headed by the monarch, the king. All right, so I only came today to bring more lessons, to bring clarity and understanding, especially in the time that many of our brothers and sisters need to hear this information. I'm not here to cause confusion because confusion is already here. I'm here to bring clarity. I'm not here, to hold no one's hands. Those days are over. Every man and woman must carry their own flag. And in this case, carry your own cross, because our flag is a cross. And to prove that this is who you are and you want to come back home, you must do the work that's required. This video is specifically for learning how to trace yourself back by utilizing what you got to get what you want. And that's what I'm going to name the title of this segment: Use What You Got to Get What You Want. Now, you may be asking, what am I talking about? Use what you got to get what you want. To get what you want is to get out of this reality that we are calling ourselves living in, that we've been succumbed to, which is full of flawed information, because it does not connect you to anything of longevity. And when I'm speaking of, like I said, your land, what you think is your estate, but you don't have an estate. I'm just gonna have to keep that clear to everyone who keep thinking they have an estate. You have no estate. Only way for you to have a state, which is actually an abstract title, goes back to the monarch, to the crown. And as far as I'm concerned, or know, that the United States does not give out, any so-called estates. They give out land grants via fee simple, but they don't give out estates, because the state is something that requires what? An inheritance. They are already calling themselves as being inheritors, as trustees. But what are the trustees of or for? That's the big question. The only way that question could be answered is by utilizing that piece of paper that you have that we call a birth certificate. Historically, it was known as a settlement certificate. And I'm only here to be able to bring clarity what that information of that settlement certificate or birth certificate is, to be able to trace yourself going back to an ancient time, to solidify yourself in the books of life, in the book of life. And there's only one place that's going to be able to record that book of life that's going to hold much, much validity. And that's going back to the true church, which actually is created or underneath the jurisdiction of the empire or the kingdom that was established under. And in this case, where I'm speaking about the de jure English Church, not the Roman Catholic Church, the de jure English Church. You have one hand, you have the de jure English Church, and on the other hand, you have the Roman Catholic Church of England. We're called the English Church of England. We're not the Roman Catholic Church of England. The English Church of England are for those English heirs who can trace themselves going back to time immemorial, 1189. But even the original English Church goes before that. The original English Church goes prior to before so-called Roman occupation of the location that we want to call ancient Britain, or what they call Romano Britain or Brighton. Before so-called Rome came, it was actually called ancient Albion. Yes. And Albion is another way to say England. And we know English is supposed to be a place where English comes. So therefore, the English language has actually always been here because it was the language of the Albions. But we're not going to talk about that. That's not what this video is for. This video is only about bringing more clarity to the settlement certificate, as well as your so-called pedigree, which is your genealogy that we call in here as humans. Genealogy is very important. And your genealogy is what's going to also too be able to solidify your political standing, because it's going to be able to tie you back to the kingdom that your family come from. All right, so let's go ahead and get started on this. I don't want these videos to be long because I want to be able to make many of them. And right now, since time is the essence, it's very important and imperative that I get as much of these videos out there so that way you can start connecting the dots. And I'm not going to sit up here and pretend that we don't need the funding to be able to keep this going on. We need funding. I need you to help us. I need you to help us help you. Only way for us to be able to help you to do this great work, it requires donations. And then eventually we're going to show you that our work is something that you definitely want to be behind, because it's for you. It's for your heirs. Especially once you do the remembering the fact that you are actually English heirs, or you may be a British subject, one or the other, either way around. For those who want to get out of their position with they're in today, which we call hell. Hell is the chamber underneath the king's chamber, the exchequer's chamber. So it's the chamber underneath the exchequer's chamber. That's hell. You're there right now. And that's where the debtors dwell. And yes, we know so-called fiat, Federal Reserve notes. Yes, they are debt notes. And unfortunately, we have to use what we got to get where we need to get. That's why we keep saying, use what you got to get what you want. Pause and get ready to start on this lesson.
Apologize for that. Now we're going to go ahead and get into the meat of what this video is about. Let's go ahead and read the topic or the title. It's called Gen Guide, the Genealogist's Guide to the Reference Sources and Research Material. Now, before I actually go into this, I think it's key that you understand pedigree and genealogy. So we're going to go ahead and hold for 1 second. Let's go ahead and pull this on up, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Okay, so we have pedigree. Now, pedigree, many of you only understand it via of an animal, dogs, cats, horses, breeding stock. But pedigree also is for humans, but we don't call it pedigree. We call it a genealogy chart or ancestry chart. And so pedigree chart, a document to record ancestry used by genealogists in study of human family lines and in selective breeding of other animals. And now we're going to focus on pedigree for humans. And it says pedigree, human genealogy, ancestry chart. Let's go to genealogy. Now everyone follow along, because this is exactly what you're going to have to do to be able to follow along the path or the track that I'm trying to keep you up on. You're going to have to walk this path yourself. No man knows, man knows not by being told. So as I'm teaching you or showing you what I've done, you can do it too. Because for you to come home into the church, you're going to have to be able to prove your works. Genealogy, the study of families, family history, and the tracing of their lineages. Genealogists use oral interviews, historical records, genetic analysis, and other records to obtain information about a family and to demonstrate kinship and pedigrees of its members. The results are often displayed in charts or written as narratives. The field of family history is broader than genealogy and covers not just lineage, but also family and community history and biography. So genealogy, as you can see, it's broad. It's not specifically just your family lineage coming from a specific individual, but it's the family who's branching out from that one specific individual, who all are connected to that line. That's what the pedigree is. Who's all behind you. So you're going to have to trace all of those people who are behind you or you come from, who share a same blood or connection. And today, only way for us to be able to verify that, like I said, use what you got to get what you want, is going to be your birth certificate, i.e. your settlement certificate. It says the record of genealogical work may be presented as a genealogy, a family history, or a family tree. Many of you are familiar with a family tree. In the narrow sense, a genealogy or a family tree traces the descendants of one person. Let's say, for instance, your grandmother. Whereas the family history traces the ancestors of one person. And that's, once again, all of the people behind your grandmother. But the terms are often used interchangeably. A family history may include additional biographical information, family traditions, and the like. This is the reason why we say keeping a record of who you are is very important, because it's going to be a day that you're not going to be here. And everyone is going to want to know who they come from, or what they inherit, or how to keep the family legacy going. And without information, or without any type of records to be able to pick up, then that's going to, have you disappearing, or what they say, being lost in time. Right now, you don't want to be lost in time. You actually want to be occupying this space, time and space. You better be in that time and space. Otherwise, you don't exist. Okay? The pursuit of family history and origins tend to be shaped by several motives, including the desire to carve out a place for one's family in the larger historical picture. See, you need to be able to find your face or your family in historical era, and it must be able to utilize, and it must be based off of the information you have today to utilize, and it must not be abstract. Including the desire to carve out a place in one's family in the historical picture, a sense of responsibility. Remember, this is a responsibility to preserve, like it says, it's to preserve the past for future generations. A self-satisfaction and accurate storytelling. So this information, to know who you are, it's the obligation. It's not an optional feature. It's mandated. It's mandatory. That's the reason why we went to the church weekly, because it was our religion. So therefore, we can keep our history intact, our law intact, our identity intact, our culture intact. And when you leave that, you left that to go and do something else that you don't know anything about, you lose all that you actually was supposed to be inheriting, because you broke the chain. For those of you who actually understand dog breeding or animal breeding, what happens when you do no longer register your the offsprings of that brood, or that dam and sire off that litter? What happened when you don't register them? They lose their inheritance. They become non-papered animals. A non-papered animal is considered worthless. Because we don't know what's behind it. We don't know the health, the genetics, any of these things that we may be potentially bringing into our stock. We don't know the integrity of if it's actually purebred. It's many things. That's the reason why having a pedigree or a genealogy is important. And today, especially us as people or humans, you better know who you are and where you come from. All right. And the last part on this paragraph, the genealogy research is also performed for scholarly or forensic purposes, or to trace legal next of kin to inherit under intestacy laws. And intestacies, though, it's pretty much being passed or dying without a will. All right. Now, our focus is, because we're English, or we would say Anglo-Saxons today, or we're Anglo-Saxon Berbers, but you can say English today. Same thing, same way. But the purpose of this is genealogy, and we're going to talk about the surname. So then we can get to the settlement certificate. All right. So overview: amateur genealogists typically pursue their own ancestry and that of their spouses. Professional genealogists may also conduct research for others, publish books on genealogical methods, teach, or produce their own databases. They may work for companies to provide software or produce materials of use to other professionals and to amateurs. Both try to understand not just where and when people lived, but also their lifestyles, biographies, and motivations. Once again, this is how you actually learn who you are and figure out where you come from, because you're only going to operate based off of your genetics. This often requires or leads to knowledge in antiquated laws, old political boundaries, migration trends, and historical, socioeconomic, or religious conditions. See, you need to know who you are, where you come from, so that way you can tie yourself back into your proper family, so that way you can get your true understanding regarding who you are. Because everyone is not the same. Everyone is not underneath the same political status. That was the confusion. And the only way for you to come out of this confusion, you must do the work by yourself to get back to the group. All right. Genealogists sometimes specialize in a particular group. Now, point of interest, we're going to have to focus on what we have. Like I said, your surname. That's all you know that you have to be able to tie yourself back into a pedigree, a family. A particular, like it says, a particular surname, such as one name study, which that's what we're going to be dealing with. And then other ones, they talk about a single village parish, such as one place study, blah, blah, blah. And genealogists and family historians often join family history societies, where novices can learn from more experienced researchers. Such societies generally serve a specific geographical area. Their members may also index records to make them more accessible or engage in advocacy and other efforts to preserve public records and cemeteries. So as you see, there are many people who's doing this work. And as you start finding yourself coming back home, you're going to find your other family members or clans or tribesmen or whatever. But in this case, we're going back to the church, to the English church. All right. The terms genealogy and family history are often used synonymously, but some entities offer a slight difference in definition. The Society of Genealogists, while also using the terms interchangeably, describes genealogy as the establishment of a pedigree by extracting evidence from valid sources. You see, so you're not going to just get it from one area. You're going to have to be reading books, other form of periodicals, word of mouth, and definitely, most definitely legislation, which is going to probably be your best friend, because history and law should be tied together. They work in tandem. Your history and your law should be in tandem. All right. Of one generation connect to the next, and family history is a biographical study, a genealogical proven family, and of the community and country in which they lived. Okay. And remember, we deal with the church, the English church. So it says community or religious obligation. In communitarian societies, one identity is defined as much by one's kin network as by individual achievement, and the question, who are you, would be answered by a description of father and mother and tribe. All right. Family history plays a part in the practice of some religious belief systems. It sure does, just like the English church. And then all churches actually back then, even now, deals with family history to tie yourself back to it. Lawyers, legal and forensic research. Lawyers involved in probate cases do genealogy to locate heirs of property. You hear this? Lawyers dealing with probate cases, that's like estates, do genealogy to locate heirs of property. They didn't say do DNA, they said genealogy. Said detectives may perform genealogical research using DNA evidence to identify victims of homicides or perpetrators of crimes. Okay, so lawyers do use genealogy, detectives use DNA evidence as well as genealogy. All right, in the history, it says historically in Western societies, the focus of genealogy was on the kinship and descent of rulers and nobles. You see, so they didn't really care about so-called commoners. They only cared about who's the nobles and the rulers at that time, often arguing or demonstrating the legitimacy of claims to wealth and power. The term often overlapped with heraldry, in which the ancestry of royalty was reflected in their coats of arms. Okay. It says, even though right here it's going to say modern scholars consider, of course, modern scholars And remember, a lot of the books have been tampered with, the calendars been tampered with, all of that. So what we say here on the King's Bench, eat the meat, spit out the bones. Modern scholars consider many claimed noble ancestors to be fabrications, exactly, especially those who don't look like the true de jure heirs. There are imposters who are fabricating to be us, but they're not us. All right. And the rest of this, you can look up on, records and documentation. And this is the key. So that way I can transition to the next part for the birth/settlement certificate to prove who you are. Use what you got. It says genealogists use a wide variety of records in their research. To effectively conduct genealogical research, it is important to understand how the records were created, what information is included in them, and how and where to access them. List of record types. Records that are used in genealogy research include vital records, birth records, death records, marriage and divorce records, adoption records, biographies and biographical profiles, cemetery lists, census records, church and religious records, including baptism, brit milah, confirmation, bar mitzvah, marriage, funeral, death, membership, city directories, telephone directories, coroner's reports, court records, criminal records, civil records, diaries, personal letters, family Bibles, DNA tests, immigration naturalization records, hereditary lineage organizations, records, including the Daughters of the American Revolution records, land property records, deeds, medical, military, conscription, newspaper, obituaries, occupational, you hear this? Look, all of this, oral histories, passports, photographs, poorhouse, workhouse, almshouse, asylum records. So these are all of the records you're going to use to try to tie yourself back to your family, going back to the time of the kings and queens of England, going back to time memorial 1189. Like it says, to keep track of their citizens, governments began keeping records of persons who were neither royalty nor nobility. All right, so they was keeping records of just regular commoners. In England and Germany, for example, such record keeping started with parish registers in the 16th century. All right, now we know in England, England had the Anglo-Powhatan War in 1619. And then after this time, this is when they actually start keeping records of everyone who was actually born. So, and so-called in the colonies. So they know who you are. Don't think they don't. They know exactly who you are. And remember, they reconstruct the history to make sure you stay in the dark so that way they have an upper hand on you. But the truth always finds its way out. Like they said, light or water always finds some type of crack to peek through. So we're giving you your cracks. All you got to do is peek through. All right. And the rest of this, like, family names, types of information. Genealogists who seek to reconstruct the lives of each ancestor consider all historical information to be genealogical information. Traditionally, the basic information needed to ensure correct identification of each person are place names, occupations, family names, first names, and dates. However, many genealogists greatly expand this list, recognizing the need to place this information in its historical context in order to properly evaluate genealogical evidence and to distinguish between same name individuals. A great deal of information is available for British ancestry with growing resources for other ethnic groups. Now, this is key right here. Family names are simultaneously one of the most important pieces of genealogical information and the source of significant confusion for researchers. That's why many, like those who are coming out of the MSTA paradigm, why your prophet told you not to throw away your surname. Your surname is going to tell you what nation you actually truly come from. All right. In many cultures, the name of a person refers to the family to which he or she belongs. This is called the family name, which is your surname or last name. Etymologically, surname means free name. All right. Patronymics are names that identify an individual based on the father's name. For example, Margot or Marga Alesfosdottir is Marga, daughter of Olaf, and Olaf Thorson is Olaf, son of Thor. Many cultures use patronymics before surnames were adopted to come into use. A patronymic wants us to understand, once again, that's the father side, the father lineage. And in the kingdom, we deal with patrilineal, which is the father side. In Rome or the colonies, they deal with matrilineal, which is the mother side, which places them underneath partus sequitur ventrem, which is pretty much means that the child takes the status of the mother. Even if the mother is free or a slave, no matter what, the child's still underneath the mother status. In England, the child is underneath the father status. So de jure England, you're underneath the proper father status. De facto, colonies or whatever, you're underneath the mother. We ain't gonna go through that on this video. That will be another time. All right, it says in Denmark and Norway, patronymics and foreign names were generally in use through the 19th century beyond, though surnames began to come into fashion towards the end, blah, blah, blah. And the rest of this, like I say, you can read on your own. Let's go ahead and get to it, to the meat of this settlement certificate. Now, please pay attention, because once again, I know many of our brothers and sisters don't want to hear this, but it must be heard. And I'm going to go ahead and bring that on part 2. Stay tuned. Peace.